I will right away ask the first question. Throughout November, we often see COP26 popping up on our social media. And they say it has something to do with climate action. But what is it really? Can you explain it to us in a simple way?
Thank you so much for your question. I can talk about the COP mainly from my own perspective. And yes, I mean, what you see, or the information you see about COP is correct. It is about climate action. But the COP itself is the biggest forum actually for climate action. We had 40,000 people attending at its peak this year, even though we had corona restrictions and there were of course issues with representation. It still remained the biggest forum on climate action. But then at the actual event, we can see that it's mainly geared either towards negotiations. So they're negotiating the text of the decisions made that builds on the UNFCCC as well as the Paris Agreement, but also follows up on what has been achieved, what has been agreed on previously. So, I mean, in broad strokes, that's one aspect of the COP, and then the other one is, are the side events, which are mainly focused on raising awareness and underscoring particular issues. I mean, it could range from health to biodiversity to human rights, as in our event. But countries and different thematic groups are there to actually just raise their own profile as well as raise awareness around certain topics and aspects of climate change. So those are the main dimensions of what the COP is about.
All right, thank you for the explanation. I think it is very simple and I'm pretty sure the audience understand it. So the next question is, when you were there, was there anything that happened which would be interesting for us to know about?
Well, I think something that would be interesting to know about when it comes to actual expectations of the event is something I can share. I mean, I had expectations I would see, a very dynamic discussion on how to achieve, let's say, greater ambitions on phasing out carbon and phasing out coal in general. But unfortunately, when I got there, the discussion, first of all, many of the sessions at the beginning were closed, so you couldn't access those. And as an observer like myself, it was, it was hard to get access to the actual negotiations until later in the process. And when we got access to the negotiations, it was mainly about, it was quite dull actually. This is my own personal perspective. It was very dull. They focused on very specific formulations, and whether there should be a comma or a full stop, whether a country should be called a country party or a state party, etc. But all of those small changes do have an impact on on the actual text as a whole. But it was just being a part of that process seemed to be, for me, duller than I expected. The place I found very interesting, and this was of course not what I expected, were the pavilions. I mean, I got to familiarize myself with what was what was on the agenda in with regards to different topics like health. Another one is local government, migration, and those are areas that I don't directly work on, but that I got some very interesting insights from participating. So just in broad strokes, that would be my perspective. And for those of you who have yet to attend, that's probably going to be the experience you will have, more or less.
Okay, so thank you so much again for the explanation. It is very fascinating to know about the expectation and the reality when you came to COP26 meetings. So when you were there any young people involved, and what role did they have in the meetings? And I hope it's not just getting coffee or printing documents.
To be honest, the representation of young people was quite conspicuous. I mean, there were several youth groups present, including from Southeast Asia, who were there under either a university banner or a banner or the private sector or the government itself. Some governments decided to also extend some of their party accreditation or their accreditation to youth groups from their country. So we had a couple of big youth groups actually taking part, and all of them coordinated with one another on different things like note-taking. So they had a purpose, so to speak, of being there. They had a purpose of influencing, which was different from what RWI was trying to do. So RWI, the organization I represent, had a less, let's say, advocacy approach, a more promotional one. So we were trying to promote the work we were doing. We were trying to contribute to the ongoing initiatives of advocacy for human rights at the at the international level, and that meant joining different working groups, taking part in some negotiations as an observer. But the youth groups played a more active role in taking notes and influencing their governments, and governments now seem to be more, let's say, open to listening to youth groups from their countries as well as from others. Each of the pavilions also had a youth-oriented or a youth-focused side event where the youth actually spoke about their own, let's say, experiences or perspectives on climate change and its and the reason why they should be there. I think all of them had this common approach of why, or a common, let's say, a common theme of why justifying why youth groups should be there.
Okay, so the fourth question is, what was the output of COP26? Was it just another long text agreement or policy book?
Tough question. I mean, on the one hand, it is useful. I mean, it is good that we managed to because this year's COP was about operationalizing the last part of the Paris Agreement, which was namely Article 6, which is the biggest, the core pillar of that actual agreement regarding carbon markets. We have been trying to find or strike a balance and agree to a text for the operationalization of that article. So that was important to complete, to actually start the implementation of the treaty. But with that said, on the other hand, we saw some watering down of different types of formulations, including human rights, but also, as you all may know, this commitment to phase down coal and not phase out, and so forth. And this made the text actually slightly, or I would say significantly, weaker than what we expected. So in that sense, most of the work needs to take place beyond what is in that text, I must say, for us to be able to not only meet our commitment of maintaining the global temperature at 1.5 after 1.5 degrees as compared to the pre-industrialized period, and also ensure that human rights is safeguarded in the programs, as well as used as a way to catalyze change.
So what can we, as the young people, expect from the output? Do you think world leaders will seriously make it happen?
That's also a question that I have, that I'm kind of torn between. I mean, the youth, hands down, youth participation is important to actually not only expose different states through naming and shaming, but also advocate for something better than this. And this has actually worked in some angles. I mean, human rights is one area where, you know, some countries actually were from the get-go opposed to any sort of human rights formulation. But after continuous advocacy in collaboration with the indigenous groups, but also with the youth, we managed to get some sort of formulation. So something there is better than nothing, right? But of course, there are limits to what youth and observer organizations like ourselves can do, because it is a state-led process. I'm not gonna lie about that. So states decide on these things between themselves. So sometimes they can agree on certain texts outside the actual negotiations, and then when things open up again, you realize, hey, the text has changed. I don't understand why, you know? And this is also why having solid connections with state representatives and negotiators is very important. But I can also understand, because of these issues, why youth groups may feel disenchanted by the lack of progress, but also the non-transparent process of agreeing to different types of texts, and also the lack of, let's say, engagement, meaningful engagement with these groups.
Okay, thank you so much for answering all of the questions.